But Holly Sang is here to present. I'm in a supporting role. We both work at World Relief. Holly is the director of volunteer mobilization. She's been there for 9 years, has lived in multiple countries,
Yeah.
grew up and lived in multiple
Who knows
countries.
where Kazakhstan is? Yeah. Okay. Wow. A lot
This is a-
more than
this
when
is-
I moved to Kazakhstan.
This is a very informed group.
Excellent.
So
You can kind of tell how informed people are by asking them where Kazakhstan is.
I'm gonna pray before we
Thank
start.
you. I was going to ask you too.
God, we're grateful for today. We're grateful for a new day, and it's great to have the sun, God. It just feels so much brighter when the sun is shining, and we know that the sun is always shining. We just can't always see it because of the clouds. So give us that assurance of your love, even when we can't see it or feel it, that you are loving us and you are present with us. Thank you for World Relief and how it has served so many people over so many years. Thank you for Holly. Bless her words and open our ears. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, everyone. I'm really glad to be here with you this morning. But yeah, yesterday I was like, and I have a 2-year-old, but she's a great sleeper. So we don't have a lot of like super early mornings. So I was like, everybody will be feeling this. It'll be fun. I won't be the only one. But I'm excited to be here with you this morning. And where is the camera for this crowd? I
It's
want
up,
to be.
it's up here. So you are on,
TV in the center.
you
Oh,
are
it's
on,
right here.
Yeah, below the TV in the center.
Okay, so is there anywhere like standing here is okay?
Yeah,
Standing
yeah,
here?
yeah.
Fine. Okay.
I'll follow you.
Oh, okay. It follows. Wow. Let's get this tech at work, John. Oh my God. You guys are ahead. Yeah, as John said, I've been working with volunteers at World Relief for the last almost 9 years and was a volunteer before that myself as well. That's how I first got in touch. But my parents are international teachers. They're currently in Kiev, Ukraine, doing their last year before retirement of teaching abroad. And that's what first took us to Kazakhstan when I was entering middle school and went to international school where they taught through my middle and high school years. And so really loved that cross-cultural experience, and that changed my life trajectory, I think, in a good way. You guys got it? These double doors. The double doors, extra challenge. Have to like do gymnastics. So that's how I ended up at World Relief. I came back to the US for college, and I went to a really not diverse Christian school in southern Missouri. And then my husband and I moved to the Chicagoland area, and I needed something cross-cultural, but we were in the suburbs and I don't want to commute. Somebody said, go volunteer at World Relief. So that started it. Yeah. So it's great to be here with you all. I think that you all know some things about World Relief. So I'm curious just to ask, what do you know about World Relief as an organization?
It is normally to microloans.
Yes,
Already.
abroad. Yeah. We have some. Yep. Okay, great. That helps me know where to start. So I'll start there. So World Relief is a global humanitarian organization. And we are celebrating our 85th anniversary this year. World Relief was founded at the end of World War II to help resettle and relocate those who'd been displaced in Europe, who'd been displaced from their homes and weren't necessarily able to go back home or didn't feel safe to return back to their home. World Relief is still a global organization, so we have over a dozen locations internationally that do microloans and HIV and AIDS work and all these different things. And then we also have over 20, and the number keeps growing and I can't keep up with the exact stat, but over 20 offices in the United States that work with displaced people and immigrants mostly. And our overarching unifying factor about World Relief is that we empower the local church to serve the vulnerable. So whether it's in Sudan or in Congo or anywhere internationally, or it's here in the US, we're seeking to do our work through and in partnership with the local church. This morning, can I use this easel?
Yeah.
Here's this morning, I'm going to talk more.
If you put that top up too, there might be more markers.
Okay.
So,
There's a bunch. Yeah.
oh, okay. Okay.
That should be good. Oh, this stuff. Let's see how this guy is. This guy. I only need one. This morning, we're going to talk about, thanks, John. Wherever good to put that. No worries, the camera will just follow. me. It's great. It's a little bit Big Brother, but
Can I
it's
put it
great.
someplace else, Julia, so the camera can see it?
Maybe here.
Camera won't
Let's put it over
see
here.
it. On the other's not gonna see it.
On the other side.
Or I'll stand on this side.
Yeah.
Okay. So this morning I'm going to talk more about our work here in the United States and then locally here in Chicagoland as well. We have 3 offices and we do have volunteers from River Forest. Oh, where do people live? Does everybody live around here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we do have volunteers actually from here, around here as well. So I'll be talking about volunteers as well at the end. And somebody let me know when it's, oh, there's, keep it
It's an
on
hour
time.
off.
You guys finished at 10, right? It's an hour off. You guys finish at 10. I will not. We would all be feeling it. But yeah, help me keep an eye on the time because I don't want to run out of time to talk about volunteer engagement. Hope that you'll all sign up to volunteer at the end of this. But I want to kind of talk about who are we working with here in Chicagoland and help you understand some of the distinctions about those things and some of the overarching things about that. And I'll share a little bit about what we do as far as what our like staff services look like, but mostly then going to talk about how you can play a role in that because that is our focus. So who knows any group of people that World Relief serves? Like refugees.
Yes.
Yeah, you're like, what's she asking? We don't know. Any others that you know? Any other like terms for immigrants? Okay,
Migrants.
great. Yeah.
Legals.
Oh, I'm not gonna write illegals up here, but we'll talk about that.
Oh, asylum seekers?
Asylum seekers.
Don't use illegals as a noun.
Any more? Anybody heard the term
Displaced, you said.
displaced? Yeah, yeah. Many of these are.
And just poor people.
Okay, yeah.
They're in their own country.
Displaced. Maybe I will write them up here. We'll talk about these terms. Illegal. Oh, the window's open. Persecuted. Okay,
We
yeah.
can move the other window over.
Yeah, it's fine,
That's
it's
making
fine.
it cold.
I was just like, wow, this heater is not really doing its and who's heard the term humanitarian parolee? Anybody? Okay. Kind of a funny term. Okay. I'm going to talk about these ones. First of all, I'll just say we don't use the term illegal immigrants or illegals because people aren't illegal, right? And that's a descriptor of people, right? So we would say like undocumented or those who don't have like, you can say those who don't have legal documentation, right? Because the documents is what it's about. And actually, that's what we're going to find to be true about all of these terms. There are some distinctions about the reasons, what we call like the push and pull factors. So push factors are things that would drive someone out from their country, push them out, right? And pull factors are the things that pull people, attract people to a place, right? So sometimes I'll use like my own family as an example. My parents wanted to be missionaries. They felt called to be missionaries even before I was born. And they did actually go. And when I was very, very young, we were going to like go be lifelong missionaries in the former Soviet Union. And a pull factor, you know, was that calling and the lostness. Well, maybe the push factor was that calling. And the pull factor was like the people didn't know about Christ, right? And then my father had like a medical emergency, pushed us back to the US, right? So everybody like makes decisions based on these push and pull factors, especially when we're talking about like moving globally. There's all those sorts of things. And God actually says he's responsible for that, right? That he's responsible for moving people around the world and determines where they are and where they will be, which is a good thing to remember. So as we're talking about these different people groups, like immigrants is kind of an overarching term. Immigrants is people who move from one country across an international border to another country to reside. That's overarching like umbrella term. Technically, like all of these can fall into that umbrella. So we'll just leave immigrants at that point. refugees is probably what World Relief in the US is best known for. In fact, when I started working at World Relief and in the years prior, like we would often introduce ourselves as a refugee resettlement agency, and we still do a lot of refugee resettlement. What that means is refugees are people who have fled persecution. They've been displaced from their home country. They're maybe fleeing violence due to civil war or genocide, political or religious persecution, any of these types of things, right? That's the push factor, pushing them out, right? It's not safe for them to stay in their home country. And then they go through a process with the United Nations. It's technically the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR is what it's abbreviated to. And that's how they can achieve refugee status. And then there's a few options that refugees have with the UN. Maybe they will, if the conflict resolves in their home country, like say a war ends and it's safe for them to go back home, that could happen. We've seen that with some Syrian refugees, like they've fled Syria, been displaced for 10 years, even though the conflict hasn't ended, actually, by the way, war in Syria is still happening. They've decided to go back because they don't have another option that's good, right? And they don't want to keep being displaced, like living in a refugee camp or whatever that's looking like for them. So sometimes refugees go back to their country of origin. Sometimes refugees are allowed to stay permanently in the country that they fled to. So say like a Syrian refugee fled to Turkey and Turkey says, hey, you have a PhD in a field that we really want more professionals in. You can stay here permanently. That also doesn't happen a lot because not everybody has a PhD in a field that they, right? But it can happen occasionally. So that's like second country permanent residence. Or refugees can potentially be resettled to a third country, such as the United States. There's around 30 something countries globally that work with the UN to accept refugees for resettlement. Altogether, all 30 countries that resettle refugees in one calendar year, all of us will only resettle less than half of 1% of the world's refugees.
Wow.
So there's a lot of refugees in the world, and resettlement, even though, I mean, we're resettling 125,000 refugees to the US this year. Even that is like less than a quarter of 1% of the global amount of refugees in the world. There are a lot of displaced people in the world right now. So that's about refugees. When refugees come here, World Relief we're one of 10 resettlement agencies that contract with the federal government actually to be an official refugee resettlement agency. And so that means we have certain responsibilities that we must provide to those refugee families to help them get established, helping them find housing and employment and enroll in like some benefits that they have to start out their life while they're getting up and running. And then we also do a lot of work because that program is actually only 90 days long. It's a 3-month program. And we do a lot of work at World Relief to gather other funding streams, including from church partners, from private individuals, I think we have over 100 different funding streams, not even including private individuals, so that we can support people and work with them as they need and give them guidance for multiple, like at least 1 year. Some programs work with people up to 5 years to help them really make the adjustment to life in the US. One of our goals is that we build welcoming communities and help people find a place of belonging. And you can't do that in 3 months when you don't speak the language, right? So that is some of what we do with refugees. I'm gonna skip down to asylum seekers next. I went to a refugee resettlement conference in Canada, like maybe the year before COVID, year or two before COVID happened. And while I was there, I learned that in Canada, the word for refugees is refugee entrant. And the word for asylum seekers is refugee claimant. They call both of these groups refugees because the push factor is the same. The legal definition for what people are fleeing as refugees and asylum seekers, it's the same. Like like almost identical. The difference is the paperwork. Right? And I think we do a huge disservice to this group of people because of that with our terminology. And terminologizing people is kind of a disservice anyway, right? But that was really impactful for me to help me have like a better understanding of like, okay, both of these groups of people, these people are asking for refugee status abroad, and all their vetting and their background checks and their screening and everything is happening abroad. And then they get on a plane and come to the US. These people have to get here first. They like have to have their feet on US soil and ask for protection here. That's the difference, right? So then all their vetting and screening and all of those things happens in the US after they've already arrived. So that is actually the main difference between refugees and asylum seekers. Who knew? This is all handled through the State Department, through the Department of Homeland Security. Asylum processes is handled through like USCIS or the judicial system actually. So they like go to a court date and they state their case before a judge and they ask for protection. That is the difference. Yes.
What's the relative number of people in each of those categories?
In America?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. John, you want to look that up? How many asylum seekers are currently in the US? It's also a big number. I don't know what it is.
Currently in the,
Yeah.
there's many more, as Holly said. Last year, I think there were 60,000 refugees using these definitions that came in, and there was probably closer to 1 million.
Yeah.
I was guessing this
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
And what's USCIS?
US,
Just give me generally, I'll.
they do like customs and
Customs,
immigration.
thank you.
Customs and immigration. What's the S
Okay.
for?
That's all right, that's fine. That's all I
I
need to
didn't
know.
think of it this morning, but yeah. So that is the main difference between these two groups of people, right? Both of them are legal processes by US and international law. It's totally legal for someone to come to the US without doing anything beforehand and say, this is happening back to me back home, and it's not safe for me to stay there. Will you give me safety here? Right? The difference is that when people come as refugees, they've already asked that question. It's already been said yes to them. So when they get here, they're like work authorized. They can work legally. They can, they're also like on the path towards permanent residency and eventually citizenship. They can apply for a green card after a year and 4 years later apply for citizenship. Because all that paperwork stuff, which takes like 2 to 3 years, by the way, for them to complete, they did it already, right? Asylum seekers haven't done it yet. And so they're here, they can't work for several months. That like work authorization takes over 6 months for people to receive. They first have to apply do the application for asylum, and then they have to wait like 5 more months, during which time there's no provision for them of any kind of financial support. So I'm not quite sure what we expect them to do. So we can all agree this system isn't working great, right? It's like not.
Does an asylum seeker have to prove that they are in any kind of danger?
They do, yeah.
Because I was wondering, all these,
And so do refugees. But again, refugees do that with the UN abroad.
well, I'm thinking
Yeah.
about all those that are coming across at the
Right.
border. If once they
Mhm.
got in, could they all say, I want asylum?
Yeah,
And then we have to keep them and process them?
yeah, they can. Yeah, it's totally legal for them to do. That's how the system is set up right now. And then they do have to like prove that. So we just had a family last week who had their asylum court date. And what that is they're going and saying like, this is what happened to us and it's not safe for us there. But the things that they're fleeing are quite similar, right? There might not be like civil war, but there's like huge gangs. Like we think about like gang violence, like, yeah, there's gang violence in Chicago and like we feel safe here. We're very close to that. That's not the case in these countries we're talking about, right? And many of the countries where people are coming from, like across the southern border, don't have any access to apply for refugee status. Like there's no UN presence, UNHCR anyway, the refugee branch of the UN, there's no presence anywhere near them. They'd have to cross an ocean to get that. So this is their option to get to safety. Now, there's plenty of pull factors as well. I'm glad that you mentioned like poverty, right? Because there's also humongous poverty in like South America and Latin American countries where we're seeing a lot of people come from. My parents lived in Venezuela a couple of years and taught actually when like Chavez died, like they were there. And that's the only country they've lived in, like 15 different developing countries around the world. And the only place they've ever packed toilet paper in their carry-on luggage so that it wouldn't get stolen was to go to Venezuela. They couldn't find toilet paper. Like that's the level of poverty we're talking about, right? So that is also a push factor. And the pull factor is like America looks like this very stable, safe place for people to be.
Economic opportunity.
Lots of economic opportunity and just like a safe place for them to raise their families, right? And a dependable place where they won't get this like, well, is the new president going to ever figure things out? President dictator, right? So lots of push and pull factors that might cause people to come here seeking asylum. Migrants is like this term that's being used a lot with asylum seekers in Chicago right now, right? Because this is kind of the placeholder term. Until they apply for asylum, they're not technically asylum seekers, right? Again, like legally defining them. So we can only use this term for them. But you'll read a news article and it'll call the same group of people who like came on a bus from the southern border to Chicago. It calls them refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants, all in the same article. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, no wonder people are confused, right? So migrants is like a placeholder term, and like maybe they're not going to apply for asylum. So that would be like the proper term that they would hold with. We can also use this term for like economic migrants, people who come across and don't actually like plan to stay, but they're maybe agricultural workers and that kind of thing, and they maybe go back abroad as well. Yeah, migrant workers is a
So
term
that's
here,
the big thing
right?
in Mexico and California, right?
Right, that kind of thing. Yeah.
But once they've applied,
Yes.
we can call them
Asylum
asylum
seekers,
seekers.
and then
Don't have to wait the 5 or 6 months.
no, they're
Once they've
seeking
applied.
it, right?
Yes.
If they're granted it, then they can become asylees. Like that's the proper term, right? Also, I love to share this example because I think we think like asylum seekers, South of America, refugees, other parts of the world. No. It's about the paperwork. It's not about where they originated from. We also have refugees coming just in the last like 2 years. There used to be like no UNHCR in South America at all. They do now have an office, and we have started to have refugees also from Venezuela, from Colombia, from countries in that part of the world. We also, I know some asylum seekers from Syria, right? Because they had the ability to get to the US. You can also come like on a tourist visa, on a student visa, on something like that, some sort of visa. And then once you're here, say it's not safe for me to go back. Like maybe someone was studying abroad in the US and a war breaks out in their country and they know that their religious or political views will put them in danger if they go back. They would also be eligible to apply for asylum, right? So actually I know someone who did this. Anybody want to guess how long it might take for you to receive asylum status?
6 years.
Good guess.
5 years.
Good guess. It can be longer, actually. I know a Syrian family, right? So like we all would think like, yeah, we heard about this war in Syria. It was like a really big deal in 2015, right? Somebody who came and I think it was almost 9 years before they received their asylum status. They actually just received it earlier this year.
Isn't that also true with refugees? Because I've known
Yeah.
refugees who've waited overseas for 9 years.
Yes. The
Trying to
average
get-
with
trying to get
refugees
to the
is
US.
over 17 years wait time, actually. Because sometimes they might be waiting, some refugees might be waiting to like, will the conflict resolve and I can go back home, like before they're even pursuing or seeking out an option for resettlement. But then even once they seek that option for resettlement, they might not have a spot available that year. You know, the processing takes a very long time as well. The minimum amount of time the processing takes is 18 months. But if you have a family with adult kids, it can be much longer. So yeah, this is very lengthy as well.
So it's kind of a toss-up. I mean, you kind of put yourself in their place. It's kind of a toss-up for me. It almost seems to me that you're better off getting to the US and finding your way here as an asylum seeker than it is to hang out in refugee camps for 17 years,
I'm really glad you said that.
waiting to go through the process, because refugee camps have horrible conditions in
Right.
a lot of places.
And some places, there's not even a refugee camp.
And yeah. in
You
some
can
places
become a
there's not.
refugee with the UN and then you have to fend for yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you're hanging out in substandard and you can't work. I mean,
Some places you can't work,
you're-
yeah.
You're in
Yeah.
substandard housing without a work permit
Right,
in a foreign country, waiting for 17 years for paperwork.
right.
Seems to me you'd be better off if you could, if you had the money to get on a plane and get here and then look it out.
I love that you said that because I think we can get tied up in like legalities or should or shouldn't, but like people who are going through these experiences are often making impossible choices, right? Like, do I want this bad experience? And like many of them, almost all of them have children. Yeah. Like, do I want to put my children through this horrible experience or that horrible experience? Which one is better? And I don't actually know, right? So they're impossible choices. Yeah.
And especially if you knew someone here on whose couch you could land.
Right. Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Or you heard,
That's a big.
or you
that's a
heard
big part.
attractive stories, like through the grapevine also of like, people are figuring that kind of thing out. So, okay, let's do that, you know?
So the people from Afghanistan
Yeah.
a year ago, were those mostly asylum
Here we
seekers?
are. These were mostly humanitarian. They were like all humanitarian parolees. It was it was over 2 years ago that most of them came, but some of them were still coming.
Right.
So Afghans who came in 2021, Ukrainians in the last 2 years, and there's also this option: Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, and Venezuelans.
It's all about the paperwork.
It's all about the paperwork, right? It's not about where they come from. It's not about what they're fleeing. It's about how the paperwork looks. What paperwork did they do to get here or be able to stay here? So humanitarian parole is a temporary. This one's permanent. This one, if you're granted it, is again permanent, right? This is a temporary legal status. 1 to 2 years only. Can be renewed potentially, but not guaranteed, right? So actually all the Afghans who came here, but this one is also much faster. It's much faster. The paperwork is fast.
Who does it go through? What government agency?
That's a great question. I don't know. The Afghan crisis was unique in that the majority of people who were brought to the US as humanitarian parolees, at least one of the parents had actually, no, I think the whole family, they were working for the US government or military.
Yeah.
So they were already very thoroughly screened, right? Very thoroughly vetted. And so that also, of course, like made paperwork able to be fast. The difference here is that in the Afghan case, again, it was like a little bit unique, and was done a lot through the established refugee resettlement agencies and then through other organizations and groups as well. And it was so fast and busy, like it almost killed us all. Like it was overwhelmingly, like many people burned out in that time. Aid workers, I mean. So the US government, like when the war in Ukraine happened, we were all like, don't do that again, please. We have not recovered from like 8 months ago. Like we are not ready for that volume of people again. And so they've done something called private sponsorship with humanitarian parolees from Ukraine and from we say the CNHV. I'm just going to abbreviate it. That's why it's all grouped together because the acronym is together. These are groups who can come through private sponsorship. That doesn't mean we aren't receiving refugees from Ukraine. We are receiving refugees from Ukraine, right? That just means there's another like paperwork pathway that people can apply for, and they can be sponsored by an individual actually to come here to the US, but only for a 1 to 2 year period of time. However, during that time, they can apply for asylum status.
Okay, so the
right?
humanitarian parole paperwork does not disqualify them
It
from the
doesn't.
asylum.
No, in fact, it's
All right.
like lends itself to their case,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
you still have to be fleeing those things to be eligible for this.
How
Right.
long have these different statuses been in place in the United States?
They've all been in, this is a great question. They've all been in place for a very long time. So refugee status became like an official program, refugee resettlement became an official program in 1980 in the US, the Refugee Act that the federal government passed.
That's not-
No, it's not very long.
That started like the official work of refugee resettlement agencies. That doesn't mean refugees weren't coming and it
Right.
wasn't a legal status
But
or
they weren't
whatever, an
having to
official
go through all the
status.
paperwork.
They were, but they weren't being resettled by refugee resettlement agencies.
Okay.
I think that's the difference.
Okay.
Before that, they were coming a lot more similarly to this. And actually one of the people who helped found World Relief, she used to like call churches across the country. I think like cold call them and say, hey, we're going to send you a family from Vietnam. Get ready.
Hmm.
Like that was how it was operating, right? So way more like unstructured and just like giving people tips and good luck, right? Which was not very, for a lot of reasons, right? Wasn't very great. Sometimes they were like then the only Vietnamese family in that county. And nobody else spoke their language and they didn't speak any English. And like the challenge of adjustment was huge, right? In that case. So that's some of that history. This also has been used in different conflicts over time, right? I don't actually know when the first instance of this was, but I don't like the language because we
Yeah.
think about parolee as like a criminal activity. Like, nope, totally illegal. Not, it just means temporary, right? So it's like temporary humanitarian status. That's all it is. And there's also like another temporary status that I'm not even going to talk about here, but that's sometimes for like a decade. Like there's lots of different things.
This is an example of the legal issue with this. So people from Ukraine coming to the United States as humanitarian parolees. They are not, when the war ends, they will not be eligible to be asylum seekers because there's no reason that they can't live there.
Mm.
So those people will need to go back. There may be a select few that can be, but that's an example of how the legal status
Yeah.
changes and what it allows for. So all the people that came from Ukraine, I mean, it's a little unclear. Population of Ukraine used to be 42, 45 million a few years ago. 10 or 20 million people have left Ukraine into Europe. I don't even know how many have come to the States. That's an example of something that Holly was talking about, pushing people out, but they're not going to be able to stay here indefinitely because of.
Would that change depending on who's in control? Let's say Russia ends up taking over Ukraine. And those people don't feel safe going back into that. Will that change their
That could change.
situation?
It could.
Yeah, yes.
But it's a legal decision of whether they could be considered asylum seekers at that point.
Correct.
If it's considered unsafe.
Right.
That's a legal.
Right.
UN.
It's up to the judges. Well, that'll be the US.
US
judges.
judicial system,
judges,
right?
okay.
Yeah.
And that's true even though their homeland, their hometown may have been destroyed.
Correct.
And because there's other places in the country where they could live. As we have a legal department, we have a whole legal department of 12 to 15 lawyers and Department of Justice folks, accredited folks who do work with all the folks, and that's how that has
Destroyed.
that's-
Right.
Yeah.
So I have one question about CNHV.
Yes.
How long has that been a designation and is that because of political?
It's because of the
Problems
same
or
things
economic
causing people to the same things. The economic problems are political problems. They're not in this part of the world. They're the same thing. They're not distinct from one another. We can think about them that way, but they're like this. And this has been, maybe a year or so that this group of people has been eligible for humanitarian parole with sponsorship, if they're sponsored by somebody. Yeah. So pretty
Two
new.
questions.
Yeah.
The first one may be totally out of the realm of it.
No problem.
How does DACA fit into this?
Oh, good question. Yeah. What's your other question? I'll write this so I don't forget. Okay.
Yeah, so, and the other question is that, Venezuelan man who killed that woman in Georgia, by investigating him, if that person was an asylum seeker, would they have access to, like, I think he had a criminal record in Venezuela. Would the United States have access to the criminal justice system in Venezuela to say, yes, this person is a criminal?
Good question. I don't know all the legalities, so I will speak from what I know and encourage you to like research more. But I also don't even know if he was officially an asylum seeker or a migrant, right? I don't know if that individual had applied for asylum.
Because
yet
they're
or
claiming
not.
he was here illegally. So I presume he was not an asylum seeker.
Interesting. I would, again, with the illegally, that means like, did he present himself to a customs official and say, I would like safety here, or did he cross sneakily, right? They're claiming no. Okay. I haven't researched that much. I've read this level of that news. So one thing I'll say just overarching, there is risk involved, right? Just like working with any people, like me coming here today. I don't know what kind of reception I'd get from you guys. There's like some level of risk involved.
Just finish the paperwork and we'll listen.
I know. But that is a distinction about this, right? What I know is that when people apply for asylum, even before they apply for asylum, if they're coming across the border and they're meeting an official, or if they're coming by plane or ship or something with any kind of like visa, there has been some sort of screening done, or there is screening done that USCIS does at the southern border. I don't know how in depth it is, but it does include a background check, but it might only be a background check of their US criminal history and they're entering the country that day, right? So it's like not necessarily true. I think that your question about like, do they share criminal history? There's some like international like terrorist list kind of things, levels that are more broadly shared, but that really varies depending on the country to country relationship, right? So some countries certainly would, like maybe we share very freely with France criminal records. I don't know that we do that very freely, US and
The state of
Venezuela.
Venezuela's government these days, I would doubt it.
I would guess it's not great, right? Like, but that would vary country to country, just like how like tourist visas cost different amounts of money because of the country relationships. It's very similar to that. Yeah. Did that answer that question?
To put a face, I'm sorry.
So like something that would be involved with Interpol, like Interpol, that guy may have had crimes that wouldn't rise to the level of an Interpol.
Right.
Something.
Yeah. If he's not on a global criminal list, then it might not be accessible at the point of him like entering the country, right? Yeah.
Put a face on the Venezuelan, for an example. Holly and I work with one of the women at World Relief here in Chicagoland. She's Venezuelan, grew up in Venezuela, and she was did the media, social media for the presidential candidate who lost.
Wow.
Continued on, received a lot of threats. Her family started to be threatened, and she and her brother left the country because of that. So we think that we have political animosity between our two parties, and we do. Generally, well, there's a little bit of that, maybe sometimes. But to threaten their lives is the norm in other countries.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we forget that. So these two, this brother and sister, I mean, they're adults. I don't know, she's in her 40s probably. He was a little younger, and they didn't want to leave Venezuela.
Yeah.
they wanted to stay in their home. It's like, well, there's an opportunity for us to go somewhere else. So
That's a good point too. I'm glad you said that, John, because that's another distinction about all of these versus like this one, like more broadly speaking. These people didn't want to leave. Maybe these ones, but these ones we could also say like aren't necessarily moving permanently, right? But these ones, they didn't want to leave. And that's a big difference between like the experience my family had, right? And the experience of these others, where the push factor is so strong that it forces them out, right? DACA is a whole different thing. It's not actually a permanent status. It's 2-year. It's not a status. It's a 2-year, like you can legally go to work or go to school for people who came to the US as children. Their parents brought them to the US without documentation. So undocumented children who have now become adults and don't have any paperwork for going to university or working. And so that's what DACA is. It's different. We also do work though with people through our legal team, actually, that John mentioned earlier. We work also with DACA recipients, right? Okay,
It's
in the
quarter-
interest
quarter-
of time,
quarter
thank
to-
you, thank you. I am turning this page because while it's super helpful and hope has been educational, you guys have been a great class. So like know and understand these distinctions and these definitions and these terms, and you too can read a newspaper article now and be like, fools, they used all 3 terms in one.
and it's complicated.
It's complicated,
very
yeah.
complicated.
Because we could have Ukrainians coming through as humanitarian parolees. We do. We have Ukrainians coming as humanitarian parolees, as asylum seekers. They're coming here across the southern border and seeking asylum, and as refugees, right? So again, it's not about the people group or the conflict that they're coming from. It's what paperwork path are they going through. And also because of that reason, there's a great quote from C.S. Lewis that I don't remember exactly, but like labeling people dehumanizes them, right? We all know this is true, right? So even though we've just talked through all these distinctions, what are some things that are true about all of those people?
They're made in God's image.
They are made in God's image. They are people he loves and cares about, right? And they're people we, the church, are told to love and care about. No matter what their paperwork is, right? No matter what country they're from, no matter whether we think they're legitimate or not in their pursuit of safety or residence in the US, right? This is true. It was hard, maybe, right? But is a way that we are instructed. There's over 90 places in the Old Testament that God tells the people of Israel to care for foreigners, to care for sojourners, the alien among you. And he promises to bless you for doing that, which reminds me of like my parents always, the commandment about like obey your mother and father that you may have long life. We're like, it has a promise with it. Like you have to do it either way, but you can like do it in God's name and receive this promise, right? And that's the same thing about welcoming these people. We have a promise that we will be blessed through it. So with that in mind, I could talk about that for another whole hour, but I won't. I am going to pass out for you our volunteer information, so you can take this with you. And the great thing about you guys is here you have John. If you ever have questions, you just ask him and he can get you connected to the right person. So yeah, this is a list of our individual, like I am a person and individual and I want to volunteer to help. This is a list of the ways you can do that. There are also though, volunteer opportunities like a one-time service project. You guys could all come to our warehouse in Carroll Stream and help us sort donations one day as a service project. You could join one of our English classes for adults all together and do like conversation practice with the students who are learning English. So there's also one-time service groups. There's also ways for groups to serve as like long-term as a team. So I'm gonna pass this one out too, because the paper you're looking at, and I will come back to talk about a few of these, but the paper you're looking at just has our individual service opportunities. And this one outlines the other kind of types. And I want to highlight a few things, just knowing where you guys are. So like a lot of the families that we're working with are on the north side of Chicago, not necessarily like right next door to you all here. But there are a few of our individual roles.
Although we are looking into Melrose and Franklin Park.
Yeah. Make a case for that. Right? If you look at the individual one, there's actually 2 volunteer roles that can be done virtually as well. So people can do them from anywhere. And in fact, our youth tutoring is one of them, working with youth on homework and English language practice. I'm looking at the long list one again. We have after school clubs that happen in person, but we also have after school clubs and one-on-one tutors and students meeting that happen on Zoom, actually. So people can join them from anywhere. In fact, we've had volunteers join from Europe before. So you can really do it from here, right? So youth tutoring is one of those. And then our English language tutor is the other one. So our 2 tutoring opportunities are the ones that can be done with 0 commute, right? You meet somebody over the computer and work with them. Youth tutoring is with youth, obviously. Our English language tutor is with adult language learners. So it's like peer-to-peer. And we provide robust training for everything so that you know and feel confident about what you're doing and how you're helping someone. And those are also 2 of our like top need volunteer roles, right? Who here is retired and has a lot of free time? Okay. I know that retiring doesn't mean you have a lot of free time. My parents are retiring and coming to babysit my kids while I work, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean you have a lot of free time. But the ones here at the bottom, especially the transportation assistant role, is a role that is perfect for people who are retired with lots of free time. And this is a role where volunteers are on a mailing list. And every week we send an email saying, next week, here's the opportunities to help people get places, because none of those people groups we talked about on the previous page have a vehicle, right? They all come here with no car and they cannot get to their doctor's appointments, their appointments at World Relief, home from the airport, even when they first arrive, right? We do a lot of that through staff driving people places, but also through our volunteer transportation team. So there's no commitment to serve every week. You see the email each week and you reply with your availability. We really would love to have you serve every week. We have many retired folks who do serve every week who are driving people 3 days a week. And they'd love to have you join our transportation team. But it's a great opportunity also because it's so tangible, which is awesome. Some of the volunteer opportunities within this are you actually go to O'Hare and you are the one to welcome a refugee family when they first walk into America, right? Which is super cool. And then you take them to their home or wherever they're staying that night and give them a little here's how the faucets work and here's how the door locks. Lock your door after I leave, right? These kinds of things, because then our case manager comes the next day. That's one type of transportation help. And the other is picking them up and taking them to their health screening at the health clinic, or taking them to a food pantry or a clothing closet or things like this. So more kind of local transportation assistance. Those are our 3 top areas for, those are our 3 top need areas right now. If you're what can I do? You can do anything on this page. We will welcome you warmly. But if you're what's most needed, which is a question we get a lot, those are the 3 things that are most needed right now. The one other thing, sorry to switch to the other page real fast in our last few minutes. The one other thing I just want to present to you all, because you're a group who know each other well enough, right? A little bit at least. This last one, number 4, that says serve long-term with a team. We have a couple of opportunities and ways that groups can serve together with one particular family. So you guys would form a volunteer team and you would be partnered with one either refugee or asylum seeker family. We actually have pathways for both. And you would partner with them for about 6 months. And what that looks like then is, say like 8 of you do that, like somebody visits them every week. It's like a once a week commitment of the team. So it's helpful for groups who maybe can't do a weekly commitment. If you're like, oh, I don't have that time in my life right now, you can join a team and visit once a month, right? And you're connecting with the team throughout the other weeks, right? And like keeping up with what's going on with the family. But your time commitment, especially if you're like commuting to like Rogers Park or something to visit them, is just once a month. So it's more feasible. And it's a really cool opportunity. Our Good Neighbor teams, like they get to know one another really well. They get to learn and grow together. There's opportunities for discipleship with one another as well through it. And you like see the family like progress from being very new to knowing more about life here. Yeah. So those are some of the things I wanted to put before you guys today and invite you into. The last one I will mention, and I apparently did not print enough of these, so you could like share with your neighbor maybe for this one, is this list, which is our welcome kit. This is the list of household goods that we put in every new refugee's home. And if we're able to help asylum seekers or humanitarian parolees move into housing as well, we provide this for them too. And we get all of it through donations. There's like 50 items here. Everything from shower curtain, toilet paper, bed sheets, pots and pans, all of that, everything you would need if you came to a bare apartment and you needed it to be livable tomorrow, right? So I'll pass this around as well, but maybe one for like every other person. Sorry that I didn't have enough. Here. And that's another great thing you can do with your whole church. You could do just on a Sunday school class. You can go on our website and we have an Amazon wish list and you can just order something yourself. So lots of options.
So I'm gonna assume that's the same. We've worked with Exodus a little bit.
Yeah.
So some of us have done that.
Oh,
So
yeah,
I'm
that's
assuming that
correct.
is the exact same list.
It's
because
almost identical.
It's
Yeah.
a prescribed list,
Yes.
is my understanding.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make-
I think Exodus and we have both, there are like mandated items that we have to have. And then like we've added a rice cooker because like 95% of our families use a rice cooker every day. So those kinds of additions that we're like, it's really needed, you know? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So is it that your work is similar, is my
Yes,
understanding?
yeah,
Okay.
and we actually partner very
Okay.
closely with Exodus because we're trying to strategically place volunteers with as many families as possible, right? And over the years, we've found that we're like doubling up sometimes. So we partner with them quite closely. Yeah, yeah. Who here has volunteered with Exodus before? Awesome, that's great. Yeah,
Exodus is focused on getting volunteers for the people that come. They're not involved with bringing people from and receiving and resettling.
yeah. So
You
all
guys are a
the
little bigger.
service
That's my
provision.
understanding.
Yeah, all the service provision that we do through our case management and employment, children and youth and counseling, all those teams, our education team that does the English classes for adults, and then our like legal services department. Those are all like direct client service provision that we do. And Exodus just does the community engagement part.
Just the resettlement. Right?
They don't do resettlement, actually. They're not a resettlement agency. They just they partner with resettlement agencies to place volunteers with families.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah,
they
yeah,
partner with you, so I can think of you as the umbrella and they're part,
Yeah.
a sub.
And they partner with more than just one resettlement agency.
Okay,
But they're just a like volunteer,
Okay.
like we will provide volunteers and the items as we're able.
so
kind of thing.
the family we may have been serving could have come through World Relations.
Right, would have come through World Relief or Refugee One or some resettlement agency.
Someone else comes in and provides all the
Case
furnishings
management.
and
The case management
You wait
board
till
and all of
they're
those
done.
things.
And then we.
Exodus waits
Yeah.
till they're done and then comes in.
Yeah,
Okay, all right.
yeah,
This
exactly.
kind of a list.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we're full service. We have
Yeah.
case managers and we have
Okay.
employment workers and we have children and youth.
And we have volunteer
We have an
services.
entire legal team. We have an entire education department. We have 32, we have 250, almost 250 now.
Yeah,
staff.
I think it is too.
Holly and I are part of.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess the question for our missions group is how do we use our resources there?
Yeah, and to do both and we have actually between us and Exodus, like we have a lot of volunteers who serve with both. We have a lot of churches who partner with both. And it's like, yeah, just trying to share our resources very effectively so that the most number of families can be blessed. Yeah.
Thanks, Holly.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank